Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today because we have some very exciting General Hospital news to talk about, and it's definitely worth the wait. I've been thinking about everything going on in General Hospital lately, and honestly, it feels like I'm watching life in Port Charles move in that slow, complicated way that somehow always pulls you in deeper the longer you sit with it. I find myself smiling, then pausing, then smiling again, because the story between Laura Collins and Ezra Boyle has this strange mix of warmth and tension that you just can't ignore. Laura, to me, has always been the kind of woman who holds things together even when everything around her feels like it's slipping. But lately, I can feel a softness in her that's a little more exposed. With Kevin away in Dublin and trying to keep Ace safe from all the trouble surrounding Jen Sidwell, Laura is left carrying that quiet weight of being strong on her own. And I've seen that kind of strength before. In real people, it looks steady on the outside, but inside it can feel very lonely. You don't even have to say it out loud, it just sits there in the pauses. What I find interesting is how the show keeps placing Ezra right in that same emotional space. He's not in a good place either. He's overwhelmed, a bit lost, and honestly, sometimes you can see that he's not fully sure where he belongs in all of this Sidwell chaos. At first, I really didn't know what to make of him. He had that sharp edge, that attitude that makes you think he might cause more trouble than help. And yes, he still slips sometimes, especially when he's had too much to drink and lets his words run ahead of his better judgment. I remember watching those moments and thinking, oh boy, this guy is walking on thin ice here. But what's been surprising me lately is how the story keeps softening him. It's like the writers are slowly showing us that Ezra isn't just one thing. He's not just trouble. He's also someone who gets tired, someone who gets overwhelmed, someone who clearly doesn't have it all figured out. And I have to admit, that change makes him a lot more interesting to watch. And then there's Laura in all of this. The way she interacts with him now feels different. It's not just duty or politeness anymore. There's something more careful, more attentive, like she's starting to see past the surface of him. I noticed how she keeps choosing to work with him despite everything going on, despite how messy the Sidwell situation is becoming. It feels less like coincidence and more like two people who, for different reasons, are stuck in the same storm and are slowly learning how to breathe in it together. What really stayed with me, and I keep going back to this moment in my mind, is when Ezra fell asleep on Laura's couch. It wasn't a big dramatic scene, nothing loud or shocking. It was quiet, simple. And sometimes those are the moments that stick the most. Laura covering him with a blanket, just gently taking care of him without making a big deal out of it. It felt very human, very real. Almost like something you'd see in a home, not in the middle of all this Port Charles chaos. And I found myself sitting there thinking, well, now this is where things can start to get complicated without anyone planning it. Because that's how life works, isn't it? It rarely announces when something is changing. It just shifts quietly in the background until one day you realize things aren't exactly what they used to be. I can feel the show slowly building this idea of connection between them. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in those small moments, shared worry, shared exhaustion, shared responsibility. It starts as cooperation, just trying to survive the pressure of Sidwell's influence. But I've watched enough of these stories to know that cooperation can turn into understanding, and understanding can turn into something deeper before anyone even names it. Still, I can't forget who Laura is. She has history, loyalty, and a life already deeply tied to Kevin. That makes everything between her and Ezra feel even more delicate, like something that shouldn't be rushed or misunderstood. And maybe that's what makes it so compelling to watch. It sits in that uncertain space where nothing is confirmed, but nothing feels completely innocent either. I also keep thinking about Ezra's behavior when he's not at his best. Those moments where he crosses lines, even if briefly, add a layer of tension that makes you wonder how much of him is truly changing and how much is just being softened by circumstance. It keeps you guessing, and I think that's part of the show's intention here. At the same time, I can't deny the emotional pull of what I'm seeing. There's a quiet comfort developing between them, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that just happens when two people are both a little tired of being strong all the time. And I suppose that's why I keep watching this particular thread of the story so closely. It doesn't shout for attention like some of the bigger Port Charles dramas. Instead, it lingers. It builds slowly. It makes you pause and think, where exactly is this going? I don't think even Laura knows the answer to that yet. And Ezra, from what I can tell, is even further from understanding it. But sometimes in stories like this, the most important changes start in the quietest places on a couch, in a shared moment of exhaustion, in a blanket pulled gently over someone who didn't even realize they needed care. And I guess that's what keeps me so hooked right now. When I sit back and really think about everything unfolding between Laura and Ezra, I get that familiar feeling again, the one where a story in General Hospital starts to quietly tighten its grip on you before anything even explodes. It's not loud yet, but it's definitely building, and I can't shake the sense that whatever comes next is going to matter in a big way for both of them. What stands out to me first is just how emotionally exposed Laura has become lately. She's still Laura Collins at her core, strong, responsible, always trying to do what's right, but there's a softness creeping in around the edges. With Kevin in Dublin and dealing with everything surrounding Ace and the threat from Jen Sidwell, Laura is physically present in Port Charles, but emotionally, she feels like someone carrying too many thoughts at once. I've seen that kind of quiet exhaustion before in people who are used to being the one everyone leans on. And the truth is, even strong people eventually feel the weight of always being strong. Ezra, on the other hand, feels like he's standing on unstable ground. He's not fully at ease with anything that's happening around him, especially not with Sidwell's influence looming over every decision. There's this underlying tension in him, almost like he's constantly aware that one wrong move could change everything. And what makes it more complicated is that he seems aware of it, but not fully in control of how to fix it. That kind of emotional state makes a person unpredictable in a very human way. I keep thinking about how the show has been slowly reshaping him in front of us. At first, he came across with that sharp, slightly reckless energy, someone who might bend rules too easily or say things without thinking about the consequences. And yes, those moments are still there. Especially when he's had too much to drink, there's that lack of filter that can turn uncomfortable very quickly, like when he crossed lines with Laura in those earlier scenes. But what's interesting is that the story doesn't let him stay in that box. It keeps adding layers. Now, instead of just seeing a difficult personality, we're also seeing someone who gets tired, someone who is overwhelmed, someone who doesn't really have a safe emotional place to land. And when you combine that with Laura's own loneliness right now, something subtle starts forming between them that neither of them seems fully ready to acknowledge. I keep coming back to that moment where Ezra fell asleep on Laura's couch. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it felt important in a quiet way. Laura covering him with a blanket wasn't just an act of kindness, it felt like instinct, like something in her recognized vulnerability and responded to it without overthinking. And I found myself pausing at that moment, because scenes like that in General Hospital usually don't exist in isolation. They are rarely just moments, they are seeds. And seeds in this kind of storytelling always grow into something more complicated than they first appear. Now, if I follow the direction the story seems to be leaning, I can absolutely see why fans are starting to feel uneasy about where this could go. The connection between Laura and Ezra isn't just professional anymore. It's becoming personal in a way that's harder to define. They're not just dealing with Sidwell's pressure as individuals, they're starting to rely on each other emotionally, even in small ways. And that's where things often start to shift in unexpected directions. Of course, there's a very real danger thread running underneath all of this. Ezra is right to be afraid of becoming collateral damage in someone else's power game. In Port Charles, that fear is never irrational. People do end up paying the price when they get too close to the wrong situations. And if something were to happen to him, I can already imagine how Laura would carry that. She wouldn't just move on from it. She would internalize it, question it, revisit every decision she made along the way. That's who she is. And that's what makes this dynamic so emotionally heavy. But at the same time, I can't ignore the other possibility either, the one where this connection doesn't break them, but actually strengthens them. Because there is a version of this story where Laura and Ezra become unexpectedly effective together. They both understand Sidwell's threat from different angles. They both want control over a situation that has been destabilizing their lives. And in that shared pressure, they could become something like true allies. Maybe even something more powerful than either of them expected. That's what keeps this so unpredictable. It's not locked into one direction. Still, the emotional wild card here is undeniable. If their relationship crosses into romantic territory, even unintentionally, then everything changes. Not just for them, but for Kevin as well. And I keep thinking about that ripple effect because in stories like this, the emotional consequences often arrive long before the characters are ready for them. Even if nothing is officially defined, feelings don't always wait for clarity. What makes me pause most is that neither Laura nor Ezra seems fully aware of how close they're already getting. It's happening in small gestures, in shared silence, in moments where neither of them has to pretend to be okay. That kind of connection doesn't announce itself. It just grows quietly until one day it can't be ignored anymore. And that's why I keep watching this particular storyline with so much curiosity, because it sits right in that dangerous middle space between trust and risk, between comfort and consequence, between friendship and something that could easily become much more complicated. If I had to put it simply, I'd say this: nothing in Port Charles ever stays just emotional support for long. Not when the writing starts paying this much attention to it. So yes, I absolutely agree with that feeling you're pointing towards. Something is coming. The only question is whether it will be the kind of change that brings them closer together, or the kind that leaves both of them dealing with fallout they never saw coming.